All right, guys. So a while back, I did a video about 5 YouTube channels that I was jealous of. And it wasn't like a top 5 list or anything. It was just 5 people that I was like, man, there's something about what they do that I wish I could replicate on this side. And so if you see me copying these channels, like just know it's out of respect, right? And tonight's guest is was one of the people on that list. So today we're talking to Badr Milligan, host of the Short Box podcast. I don't know if there's anyone who reps a city as hard as this man reps Jacksonville, Florida. Like, is the smoothest voice in the city. He reps his city, he reps his comic shop, and he does fantastic interviews. And so I had to see if I could get some of that magic over here. So tonight, please welcome Badr. How you doing, man?
Man, it feels good to be on this side to get like a well thought out intro. I get it now. I get it and I respect it. Thank you for that intro, BJ. This is a really big honor, man. I have been following the channel. I've become a very fast fan of it. And I appreciate that it seems you've already done a little bit of research and that's humbling. And now I'm like, damn, maybe maybe that is a shtick for everyone that's from Jacksonville, Florida, that we are just obnoxious about ripping our city, whether it be, the Duval chant or just
Uh,
letting people know, Jax.
Word. Yeah, nah. What's funny is like I don't know anything about Jacksonville except the Jaguars. And
Yep.
my last name is Jackson. So like I could point it out on a map, like, oh yeah, that's my city because it's
Yeah.
Jacksonville. There's also a Jackson, Mississippi, but I
Hmm.
wouldn't claim that one. But
I believe there's also a Jacksonville, North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken.
there is a lot of my family's from there actually.
Oh, word. Okay.
But yeah, what's funny is there's also a Brandon, Mississippi. So like there's a picture. We were on a bus one time and we took a picture of the street sign where it's like Brandon 70 miles, Jackson, whatever miles. I was like, that's
Yeah.
cool. But anyway, now that I've doxed myself, uh
Look, as we've just proven, there's a lot of Brandon streets, there's a lot of Jacksonville cities, so you
right,
got that layer of safety too.
right. So there's a lot of places this conversation can go. Um, but I figured I'd start here, right? Like how good was this comic book? I'm holding the Ultimates issue number 4 in my hand right now for the audio listeners, and my mind is blown. Like, you've read it, right?
I was just about to say, did you do so on the minute research that you just looked at my tweet that I put out like
That
maybe
that
two
did
minutes ago?
happen. That did happen.
Touche. No, I appreciate it, man. Ultimates is amazing, and I was beating myself up like, why did I like? I've been pulling them, but I
Hmm.
just haven't gotten around to reading them. Now, obviously, that's like a common problem for anyone that is a Wednesday war is or just reads comics in general. You're always going to get to a point where you just have things backed up, even
Hmm.
though you've heard amazing compliments about it, or you just know it's going to be good. But I went to Colorado last week and I loaded up, the iPad. I went ahead and got everything on Comixology. I double dipped, had them in print, but I didn't want to bring them on the plane, get it messed up in my bag.
Right.
But I got around to finally reading Ultimates 1 through 3, and I went through them like they were airplane peanuts. Like
Hmm.
I devoured them, dude. It is incredible. And that fourth issue that you just held up, I mean, for Phil Noto to jump in on art, I was like, oh, this is going to be sentimental. This is going to be a sentimental issue, and it sure was.
Yeah, man. Nah, it was the same for me, right? So I've been pulling all the Ultimate stuff, but I read Ultimates 1 when it first came out and was like, oh, I really like that. And then somehow I just kind of missed 2 and 3, even though I had them in my collection. So anyway, I went on Marvel Unlimited, read them over the weekend, and I was like, yo. And so on the pull list, I said, like, yo, maybe I need to just like drop a few titles or something so that I could appreciate the things on the list because this book is amazing. Like every issue has been amazing. I don't know what's gonna happen in issue 4. I know people got mad because Dennis posted on Twitter like, "Oh, this is how Reed Richards or Iron Man or Robert Downey Jr. as Doom works," and I'm like, "Okay, that's clearly him being facetious," but like the speculators like took him at his word, and so whatever. But
Is that why
Anyway,
I cannot find any issues of any copies of issue 3 at all? Like
that's
it's those issues I cannot find issue 3 for the life of me. But that's pretty funny that Dennis Camp is a good follow on Twitter.
yeah.
Like it's been interesting to see him post about this. I think when issue 3 came out, the Hulk issue,
Hmm.
he had posted like his kind of inspiration about that, and the I believe it's the Alatal. I'm butchering it, but like the islands that were used as like bombing test grounds. Like
Hmm.
he posted some of those declassified or unclassified docs about it, and he was like, "Look, that issue draws on like some real horrific things. I'm trying to bring this to light." So
Right.
I think that was the tweet that put this, that was like the nudge to be like, okay, let me go read this because this is a well thought out guy.
Yeah.
And I did not put two and two together that he's also the writer for 21st Century Men, which I've
Hmm.
seen that get hella praise.
Yes.
So, I'm reading Ultimates now and I'm like, I'm going to go back and read that because the writing is, it's intelligent. It doesn't insult your intelligent, but it knows it's intelligent.
Right.
And there's so many layers to peel back that it's just fun to like, it gives you a reason to want to like reread, especially
Yeah.
when we're talking about comics, which a lot of times can feel kind of disposable. I feel like this is not disposable entertainment that he's making. He's making like a statement in art.
Yeah. I also love that it takes advantage of the single issue format. Like each issue is an event. And like I want to read it in trade as well, but like you feel like you get a full experience and a different experience
Yes.
with each issue. So I'm loving it. But that issue 4, I literally read it like 4 times because it took me until the end to realize that each panel is its own timeline.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then I'm reading just horizontally, like, oh snap, let me read this whole story and then this whole story. Like
And
never.
yeah, I got that one on first read, but
Mhm.
what was messing me up is that they were playing with you where they were kind of swapping. The same timeline wasn't always happening at the top panel or the
Right.
third. So you're like, okay, I think I'm getting the full picture together. And then what I found interesting is that I think for the most part, I think 100% I'm sure on this, that it was 4 panels every page. And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, he tied it into the Fantastic Four issue. It's issue 4. I'm like, this is like a triple entendre. This is some Jay-Z shit.
Right. Right. Don't even ask me how. Like it was crazy.
Well
So,
said. Yeah.
but yeah. So anyway, I wanted to start there because it seems like we both read this book today and we're
Mhm.
both mind blown. But anyway, man. So you you've been doing the Short Box podcast for quite some time. I first became aware of you. I want to say it was the Jason Aaron interview.
Okay.
Um,
Recently.
yeah, really super recently. And I was just like, yo, this is great. Like, when you start a thing, you typically will start a thing because it's like, I don't feel like this thing is out there. So I'll bring this unique thing, right? I'm going to go inside the comic studio. I'll be the James Lipton of comics, right?
Mm.
And so then, like, you come across people that it's like, oh, wait, there are people that are doing intelligent conversations about comics, like insightful conversations with creators. Um, you're one of them. David Harper's one from Sketched and Off Panel. And I have just been enjoying sitting at your proverbial feet, listening to a master at work. It's been awesome.
Thank you. That's some like serious high praise, and I hope I can live up to that. I appreciate that. To return the compliment, I was actually made. Speaking of David Harper, I think that was the first interview I fully checked out. I think my algorithm started recommending your YouTube, and I was like, oh, that's a cool name. Comics are dope. Dope being one of my favorite words and probably most used words in my vocabulary. Period. So that got my eye. But when you had David Harper on, I think that was my first intro, and then I subscribed and I just started like adding you to my watch laters, and then I'd get through a documentary or some other podcast, and yours would queue up, and I started really enjoying your weekly new comic book day
Mm,
list. Like I'd have it on while I'm organizing the room, cleaning up, and just kind of hearing like what you're pulling. But I love the fact that you always mention like, hey, if I stick to this budget, it's going to be $30 for this week.
right.
And I think I like that touch. That is just I don't know, BJ, you're a very approachable and relatable guy because you're just an honest guy. So when I watch your videos or hear your interviews, it's like, oh, that is BJ. You know, it feels like a friend. So I've become a huge fan of your channel.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. So I want to go kind of go into comic book origins a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, and just talk about like how'd you get into this whole madness? Because you're doing comic book podcasting before podcasting is cool. So that means you gotta love comics, right? Like
Yeah.
what was the bug? What bit you?
So what bit me for the comic book bug? I mean, all credit goes to my dad. He is, I mean, on the pod when I first launched the podcast, he was like one of my earliest guests, and he was like a fan favorite early. So his name on the podcast is the Marvel OG, but he goes by Joe Milligan, or Big Joe. So my dad has been in comic books for as long as I remember, man. Like I'm talking I'm a toddler and my dad is buying us X-Men figures and playing with them on the couch with us, making the noises and, coming up with stories. And, like having kids for him was basically just an excuse to buy toys, like buy more toys, buy comics and continue being a kid himself. But it wasn't, comics was kind of a hard sell. Like I was a really big reader as a kid. And that kind of stems from not being, I was not born in the US. I was born in Morocco and
Mm,
I moved over when I was like, less than 5 years old. So when I came over, I had a speech impediment and I had to be put in speech classes. And, so they really pushed reading on me.
mhm,
So I grew like just really like reading, but comics just took a minute. And it wasn't like I remember the first comic my dad ever gave me was a Fantastic Four issue. And he was like, hey, give this a shot. I think it was his first time like testing the waters. I was old enough to like be reading and maybe comprehend. So he gave me this Fantastic Four book. I read it. It just wasn't my thing. I remember it just being too sci-fi, too wordy. And, that was that. Well, around, I'd say like I don't know, like sixth grade, like early middle school years. I remember that he was in the Navy, by the way, and he'd be going on like these long deployments, like 9 month deployments every other year, pretty frequently. And I remember around like early middle school year, I had made a comment like, Dad, if you leave, I'm gonna be so bored, because he was fun. He'd play video games with us, he would take us out and all that. And he was like, only boring people get bored. Like there's plenty to do in this house. I mean, you read a lot. Go read a comic book finally. And he handed me. I'm gonna have to look up the numbers exactly, but it was the Spider-Man issue that was an Onslaught crossover. It was done by John Romita Jr. and it was Ben Riley Spider-Man. And I remember just, I mean, I can close my eyes any day of the week and picture that book. I own like so many copies, but it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. I'm like in the sixth, seventh grade. Ben
mhm.
Riley Spider-Man is cool as hell. So that was that. I was like, who's this Onslaught guy? Like, whoa, this Spider-Man is really tough. He's not like the animated series. So that was like the bug that bit me with comic books. Like that book, I think I went through his entire collection while he was out, on deployment. And my dad is like an old school Marvel head, like,
Mhm.
born in the 60s, grew up in the 70s, 80s in Jersey. Like he was, close to Marvel, the source and all that. He bleeds that Crimson M. So, I grew up just as a Marvel kid and yeah, I mean, that's the bug that bit me without going too deep.
Got you. That's funny. So like, because I wouldn't say I had comics as a kid, right? Like my grandmother lived in New York, so we would visit for the summers. And my uncle had a friend. I don't know if he worked at a comic shop or what, but he was like the like stereotypical like black nerd dude in the 90s. And
Hmm.
so like he had like the silk anime shirts and he like owned swords and like
the
but like
swords, the
yeah.
swords is the dead giveaway. And it didn't it took me a while. It took me into adulthood that I realized, oh, my dad was the black nerdy kid. That's who
Yeah.
he was. Because my dad was into comics, was into kung fu. He had to learn kung fu because he just kept getting picked on. But my dad also owned swords too. Like yeah, it wasn't until adulthood I'm like, Dad was the black nerdy kid. That's what
Right.
it is.
Right.
But he
So
would
yeah.
whoop your ass though. Like try if you want.
Right. So yeah, my uncle's friend Ron would drop off like Rite Aid bags just
Hmm.
full of comics. And that would be the entertainment because my grandmother didn't have cable. Well, we had cable on one TV. My grandfather used it to watch baseball like seemingly 24/7. I don't know how it was even
Hmm.
possible, but anyway. So that's when we got comics. And as a kid, we would just kind of fight over. It's me and like five of my cousins in my grandmother's house. So we would just fight over like which covers we liked the best. And for me, I was just like grabbing some typing paper and drawing those covers. Um, but then I'd go home, for the school year and like never see a comic again. And so like for whatever reason, like it just didn't click in my mind that you could still get comics elsewhere. Just I thought it was a New York thing. But
Yeah, I heard you say that on the Ben Amin episode, and
uh
that had he died laughing when you said that you thought comics was a New York thing. Because same here, I thought Marvel was real in New York. I thought that
mhm.
that was like my glimpse into New York before I got into like New York hip hop. It was Marvel. Like I was like, oh, New York is exactly like Marvel, and I think that's why I gravitated towards like Marvel. And anytime I go to New York, there's still like a sense of awe when I go there.
Mm,
But yeah, for that New York connection.
word. Yeah. And so, but with all that said, I was an animation fan, so I'm a big DC fan. Um, it's only recently I've been getting into Marvel, I guess just for channel reasons. But been enjoying it. So
That'd
it's
be
been
very
cool.
hard to believe considering you got a Marvel hat on and a Marvel shirt on.
Yo,
Marvel comics, yeah.
I try to tell people, right? Like if DC had better merchandising deals, like
Mm.
you'd see less Marvel on me, but I gotta go shopping. And if I gotta go shopping, I'm gonna buy something cool for me. And there are Marvel shirts and hats and paraphernalia everywhere. So
I agree. Marvel has they've got they're tapped in really well with like the zeitgeist, and I think
mm,
that the zeitgeist itself, like music, obviously comics and movies and pop culture, really embrace Marvel and DC. I think, yeah, the merchandise just does not compare to the deals that I think Marvel has a Kith contract for goodness
mm,
sake.
right.
They've got I think they had like some ASICs come out as
They
well.
did.
It's on and on. So I think they've kind of like they've got a tight grip around like that cool factor. Not saying that DC isn't, but when you compare it to like the deals that Marvel gets, the brands they work with, it's like someone on their team is tapped in pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. I was in Target today and they had like a Deadpool and Wolverine shirt. And I'm just like, whoever, like the timing is great. Like,
Yeah.
so, and then if I want a DC shirt, I gotta go to Kohl's and then it's literally just a bat logo and that's the shirt. And so,
Yeah, I agree.
anyway,
Much to be desired.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so I was a big DC head uh coming up, but I got into comics way later, just looking for more wholesome entertainment than what was on TV at the time and stuff.
Sorry.
No, you're good, man. But yeah, so anyway, all that to say, it's funny that you were such a big Marvel fan because I was a big DC fan. And but with all of that, so you get bit by the bug like sixth grade or so. And do you start going to a shop? Like how long does it take you to exhaust your dad's collection and like, okay, I gotta find stories of my own?
And it did not take me long. I mean, my dad didn't have a huge collection. I vividly remember before I got it, bit by the bug, and he gave me, that amazing Spider-Man or that Spider-Man comic, that he actually went and sold a big chunk of his collection. Looking back, it was like, it was a big thing to do. He loved his comic books, and he brought them all the way from Jersey. I think they traveled with him to Spain, where he met my mom, and I think even back. So, he was a comic head, and I remember he sold a big chunk of his book because he was the only like breadwinner in the house. My mom, was not from America; she didn't even speak English, so she took care of the house. And I remember that he sold a big chunk of it. So what I had access to by the time I got into it was this old wooden. I guess it wouldn't be old because this was like it's still the 90s.
Mm,
Um, but it was like this wooden VHS cabinet, and he had taken all the VHSs out and put his comic books in there. And I mean, we're talking like no bags and boards. These things are stacked, vertical. Because
mm,
my dad was just a reader. He didn't have that collector mentality. And I think him trying to sell the collection, if I recall, didn't go really well because they were like, these are beat, these are beat up. These are
right.
this will go in the dollar bin or whatever. So he kept all of them. And yeah, I went through his collection pretty quick. And that's when I think that he started, kind of getting back into collecting as well. Cause we would go to, there was a local shop up the street called Roy's Collectibles. We'd go like every Saturday. And then when I got my first job at Domino's, my mom would take the check to put in savings for me. And I used to have like a $20 allowance every, 2 weeks. It was right
Right.
to the shop. So, yeah, I mean, he was really, I mean, he's integral to like me getting into comic books and building my own collection. He would take all the questions I had about things and, like, oh no, you need to collect this, you're missing this issue. This is a tie-in. Yeah, those are really fond memories looking back, man.
Word. So I'll ask the sentimental question up front then. So what would you say are maybe some of the biggest lessons you learned from your dad as a reader? Like what are things you look out for because he looked out for them?
I think embracing the intelligence of comic books as an intelligent like form of storytelling, and just like I think the respect for it too. My dad was his favorite things were like the old school. Your Fantastic Fours were his favorite team. He loved Black Panther, Thor. He loved Conan. He loved Doc Savage. So like. And those have ties to the literary world because that's where Conan and Doc Savage started. So I think just a passion to read and absorb stories and think a little deeper. He always used to like ask like, well, what did you get out of it? What did you think this mean? We might be riding around and he's, listening to a song. And he might try to break it down for me. So I think that approach to treating comic books like a legit art form that are capable of telling these stories that are on par with like, classic literature.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. Like funny enough, I mean, I was a reader as a kid, but there's definitely a point where I like stopped doing the required reading for high school and all that, right?
Bro,
And
I'm sorry. I was so when I got hooked on comics, I was so hooked on comics. And I think we're about the same age. I think you will remember. You remember the 25 book list challenge
uh-huh. Yeah.
where you had to read 25 books through a school semester, and at some point like you also had to log them. You had to write like what was the book, what was the author, short description. I remember asking my teacher, can I use comic books for the 25? And she was like, well, these are really short. How about we say 5 books for one entry? Bro, I
Mm,
smoked that in a month. I was
wow.
like, I think I vividly remember as a punk little seventh grader kind of scoffing at her, like, all right, I got this.
Nice. So yeah, I remember when I was in elementary, we had the Book It program, and it was like you did like
Mm.
little reading log, and I don't know how much you had to read, but you could end up with free pizza from Pizza Hut, which was awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Cannot forget about that. Big shout out to Pizza Hut, man,
Yeah,
for
man.
for shaping young comic book minds.
Right, right. And they had a pizza buffet. Like that is
Come
the
on, man.
most amazing thing ever. But
I one
so,
time, speaking of Pizza Hut, I one time got this is beyond the statute of limitations because me and my brother are both old as hell now. But my first job was at Domino's. And when my middle brother was old enough to get a job, I couldn't get him a job at Domino's. And I mean, I was like a pipeline to Domino's. I
mm,
got my brother working there. I got two of my homeboys working there. I got like three other people throughout the course, but I couldn't get my middle brother in.
mm,
And I was like, oh, let me see if I can get you a job at Pizza Hut. I remember doing the interview for him. And when he had to go into work, they were like, "Hey," I remember him coming back from that first date, and he was like, "Yo, it went well," but they kept asking me if I'm okay. I'm okay. And when I finally was like, "Why do you guys keep asking me that?" They were like, "I don't know, just on the phone, you seem very more energetic, overzealous." You know what I'm saying? And me and my brother's like kind of way more chill. So
uh,
that's my little pizza story.
that is
Feel free
great.
to cut that part out of the podcast.
Nah, it stayed.
I like it.
How do you do what was it, a phone interview?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like, yeah, it was just a phone interview. Like it was like old. Fuck, it was the old way of like applying for a job. You did your phone interview, and they just kind of either gave you the job on the phone or not. You had to call them every single day. How's my application? How's my application?
Yo, that's crazy. Like by the time I got my first job, like you had to like walk the streets, and my mom was like, all right, you got to get it. So this is such an aside, but like my mom was so old school. Like you got to pound the pavement, walk in, ask for an applicant. I'm like, this is so
Oh,
humiliating.
I did the same thing. I think I went to 5 different restaurants on this one street, and then uh, when I went to Domino's, he just kind of respected it. He was like, it's like an old dude. He's like, yeah, all you punk kids, don't want to get a job, but you came in here with your pants tucked. That's what it was like. Some corny stuff like that. You came here
Uh-huh.
with your pants tucked and a tie, and I'm gonna give you a shot.
It's great. Hey, you can come here sagging.
The selfie.
Right, right. So, all right. So you've been a sort of lifelong comics fan, but the idea to start a comic podcast right? Like that's a different level of dedication, is a different level of um I said dedication already. So yeah, but it just takes a little bit more like initiative to say, all right, I want to add something to the lexicon, right? Like what was it about comics that was like, okay, let's try doing something with it.
So I guess this is the part where I give you the origin of the Short Box podcast,
Okay.
and I'll try to give you. And I think I've shared this enough to where I've got like a good grasp on condensing it in a thorough way. In 2012, at this point, I'm like 19, just graduated high school. I think I just like joined the Air Force. I'd finished boot camp, and I was working at a comic shop with my best friend Drew, and me and him had been best friends for like 2 or 3 years. I'd met him after high school. We worked at Target together. Found out we both like comic books, and we've been friends since, like thick as thieves. And we were going to the same shop. We were bouncing around different comic shops because they would close or move. And then eventually we landed at a comic shop called Universe of Superheroes. And we were going there so much and befriending the owner and the people that work there that they gave us a chance to like work for store credit. They're like, look, you guys are here every day. You know the customers, like, might as well work here. So me and him worked there, which gave us even more reason to spend more money in store credit on comics and just be there. So we were there all the time, and we got to know a lot of the customers because we were just talkative. I mean, as you can tell, we started a podcast. Of course, we like the yabber, but we eventually met our homeboy Walter Gant, who would come into the shop. He was a little older than us, one of the coolest guys in the world. He could talk about anything, and we befriended him. We used to call him hip hop because he had an encyclopedic knowledge of hip hop. He knew everything about movies. It felt like he was reading every comic book, and we quickly became friends. And we would stay at the shop for hours on end. I'm talking like the shop closed at 10. We're probably still in the shop or hanging out front because we just locked it and still talking until like midnight. And at some point in 2012, I guess I'm still in 2012. In 2012, Walt got invited to he was a co-host on another podcast called The Side Hustle. And what they would do is just talk about like they were just four dudes that would meet on Fridays to just talk about anything. This is 2012, 2011, I think is when he started the Side Hustle. But it was just them hopping on a mics, talking about how their work week was, cracking jokes, they would drink. It felt like you were hanging out with your friends, unwinding after a grueling week. They all kind of worked in corporate America, and they all had different perspectives, and they were just unhinged at times, and it was funny. And I would just tune in. Like, even though I knew Whoa, even though I knew the other guys that did the podcast, I was like, there's something crazy about hearing my friends, like in my ears and these conversations. And it blew me away. And at some point, and then I had gotten into podcasting around that time too. And Walt at some point, well, the guy running the show at the time was named Scott. He had told Walt at some point, hey man, if you ever want to do your own podcast, like feel free to use the equipment here. Like if you had an idea, like, maybe we can, and I'm talking like he had ideas for a network early on when there was no network. And I don't think he knew what a network works. He was just like, hey, if you want people to come on and do your own podcast, do it. So I remember Walt coming into the shop one day and was like, how you boys feel about doing a podcast about comic books? And we were like, what do we got to do? He was like, everything we're doing right now that we do every night in the shop, just in front of some mics. And and that was kind of the start of it. Walt took us over to, the barn. It was literally his Scott's backyard had this barn shed thing where he had music equipment in, bands would come practice, and he had like a setup for the podcast. And every Sunday, I think 1:00, I would scoop Walt up, or Drew would be with me. We'd scoop him up, go to Scott's house, hit up the barn, and just was like, okay, what new comic books came out? What new albums came out? Any other topics? And that was the flow of the original Short Box. Was the first half was dedicated to comic books, second half was music. And I mean, it was a pretty buck wild show. We're like young 20-year-olds. I think Walt was maybe like young 30, and just saying whatever came to mind. But it was so fun, man, just to be so unconstrained.
That had to be good though, because back then music was still coming out on Tuesdays. So you got new
Yes.
music Tuesdays, new comic Wednesdays.
And we all listened to the same stuff. I was huge hip hop head. I mean, still am. I was in hip hop. I love soul. I was collecting records. Walt was like, you know, he was older than me, so he knew everything I knew plus some, and he was on to current stuff. And Drew um wasn't into hip hop, but he was getting into it through me. I was giving him like mixtapes. I'll never forget driving with him to the shop, and I gave him Kid Cudi's first mixtape, Man on the Moon, and he heard Day and Night, and he still says it to this day. That song got him into hip hop because he never knew anything like that could exist. So, you know, it was cool that Drew was also trying to give albums a shot and this and that. It was, you know what I'm saying? We just got on the mics and just talked about the things we were really into, and we're just really passionate people, and it just made for a cool show. And I think, you know, you said something about wanting to create the thing that you feel is missing, to put it out there in the world. And I think that's what I felt was missing, or that's what I wanted the show to be. That's what we all wanted the show to be, was that we were personable. You know, we didn't fit the stereotype of being a comic collector, whatever that may be. I think that's definitely changed now. But at the time, you know, we looked nothing like the other customers. You know, and we liked hip hop. You know, I think that intrinsically, you know, there was just a certain flair to the way we talked and joked and what we thought funny, and how we could easily like kind of go through topics and incorporate comics and things. And that's what I wanted. I kind of wanted like a hip hop show, a comic book show with a hip hop aesthetic. And the OG short box like was that for us.
Word. So I gotta ask then, right? Like you're putting people on the Kid Cudi, which means you're firmly in the blog era. What are some of your favorite blog era acts?
Oh my God. BJ, this might be the best question I've ever gotten, because I feel like I don't have enough opportunities to talk to people that really were in the blog era like that. Like, and I think, you know, hearing your, first of all, can I just say your DJ Ben Amin episode, it is kind of criminal that you are not putting that on YouTube. I know you've got the audio. I listened to the podcast on Spotify, and can I say that episode did my heart so good, bro. Like Combat Jack, DJ Ben Amin, I mean, I cannot tell you what that show meant to me early on. Like Combat Jack, Fat Man on Batman, and the Side Hustle were my holy trinity of podcasting. That's like all, those three shows is what made the short box.
Yeah, it's gonna end up on YouTube eventually, right? It's got a members only little embargo right now. But also Ben could not control his mouth. So
okay, BJ, you gave that warning in the intro. And I'm like, come on, BJ, he can't be that bad. By the halfway episode, BJ, I was like, all right, well, yeah, this one compared to his other content, this is kind of out there. Right. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. That was a really fun episode, man. Seriously.
Thank you.
All right, back to your question about top blog era acts. First and foremost, I would classify Big Crit as a blog era cat, because Crit was here was life changing to me, and I found on Two Dope Boys, which was like my habitual like browser I always had open. So Big Crit, Currency, because I was there for like the mixtape run where you're dropping a mixtape every month, and you had to be there. In the same vein, I'm gonna say Charles Hamilton as well, because you know. God, man, it was just something about being in that moment where it's like the internet is meeting music, and you know, you're seeing that like go beyond just Napster, and you're seeing blogs. But okay, so Big Crit, Currency, Charles Hamilton. I'm gonna say maybe a more deep or underground one. You and I. They were from like the West Coast, like kind of Pac Divish, and who is my other guy? It will come to me at some point, but those are the four that immediately come to mind.
Okay. You know, I was a big Crit fan back then. I still count J. Cole and Drake as blog era acts.
Absolutely. And I was gonna say Drake, because the mixtape Drake is a different breed. All right. Like that was in my Zoom heavy, my you know, iPad Nano heavy. So yeah, that's a good point. They were definitely from the blogs.
And I was rapping at that time. And so it was like just watching for those Z share links, like just
come on, man.
All of it.
Sometimes when I find a Z share link and it looks like it still works, the hardest thing, the most heart crushing thing is when you actually click it and it's like, sorry, this file has been deleted a long time ago.
Yeah.
Man, come on, rapid share, mega upload. Man, I was in these blog streets heavy. it was at some point my life was, and I think still to this day, it was literally consumed by hip hop or comic books. It
Yeah.
was, or in the computer. I think that's kind of like, I really love the internet and the computer. That was like my holy trinity of life.
Yeah. Nah, my favorite was Z Share. Just as someone that was rapping at the time because it had the
Mhm.
download counter. You could see how
Yeah.
many people
Oh yeah, yeah. That's
downloaded
a
it.
good point.
But Rapid Share was dope. I hated Mega Upload.
It
Like,
was unreliable. Rapid
yeah.
share was my least favorite because eventually they started. You had to wait like a minute and a half sometimes. Like,
Yeah.
come on, where's my instant satisfaction? I know I'm doing something illegal and free.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Hey,
yes.
really quick,
Huh?
you mentioned that you were working at an indie label. I know that you're from North Carolina. Where in North Carolina again?
I'm in Raleigh. I'm in Raleigh.
Raleigh. Okay.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay, North Carolina, he's in Raleigh. And it got me thinking, I was like, I wonder if he loves Little Brother as much as I do.
Absolutely.
Damn right.
I
My
love
man.
Little Brother so much that I added Ninth Wonder on Facebook when I was in college and would like go back and forth with him because I'm a Carolina fan. He's a Duke fan. Um, and then maybe a couple of years later, this was 2010, 2011, Jamla had an internship program.
Oh,
I
wow.
applied for the internship program and then had like this crazy, like, with my last $20 that I borrowed from a friend. So it wasn't even my $20. I went to school in Greensboro,
Hmm.
and Ninth is from Winston, which is like a 20 some minute drive, maybe 30. But he was doing a screening of The Wonder Year, the documentary
Oh, man. I
at
remember
this.
supporting that on like the website. Remember,
Yeah.
it was like a kind of,
Yeah.
it wasn't Kickstarter, but it was like, hey, we're trying to raise money to put this out. Man, I signed up so quick.
Yeah, yeah. And so like they had the big campaign uh
Mhm.
co-sponsored by LRG. And you're right, it wasn't Kickstarter, but it was definitely like a crowdfund type thing. And but yeah, so they're doing screenings after the movie premiered, and he did a screening in Winston at this old like theater. I met Bill Cobb from Airbud. I say from Airbud. Bill Cobb is like a huge established actor, but no matter what, he's gonna be the dude.
That played for the basketball dog. Yeah.
To me, he's gonna be the one that was like, you wash the uniform in cold water. Like that, that's him. But anyway, I met him that day, but I also met Ninth.
Hmm.
And I'm like, yo, I applied for this internship, like, and these are all my ideas about marketing because people don't use the internet right and all. Just I don't know why, but I was like just pouring my heart out on the street in front of this theater. And we talked for like what felt like hours. It may have been like 7 minutes
Hmm.
total. But he's like, well, I gotta go, but we're gonna talk about that marketing stuff. And then like a week later, I got the internship. And man, to work at Jamla at the height of the blog era when they were putting out a mixtape every month, they had like 8 rappers, 7 producers. So there was like always something going on. It was amazing.
I am like, I damn near got goosebumps. I am jealous as hell. Because when you said that on the Ben Amin episode, I'm like, I guess it was like too small because he's not mentioning it to the Ben Amin, who would know probably what he's talking about. But Jamla, man, Jam anything from Jamla, I would always check out. So first of all, I want to say Rhapsody is like absolutely in my top 20.
Yes.
I think Crowned was the name of that album. It was like 2 or 3 albums ago. I
Mhm.
still play that to death. But who did Jamla have? You had Rhapsody, you had I think Median, right? You had
Well,
Median.
so Median wasn't Jamla.
He
Median
was
for a
Justice
second
League.
was for an exchange, but he was in the Justice League.
That's right.
So
I think you
Jamla,
know I get Justice League sometimes confused with Jamla because I know there was a lot of
yeah,
crossover and stuff. But is
right.
Crisis the producer on Jamla?
Yeah, Crisis was part of the away team, but he produced a lot of stuff for Jamla and or for a lot of the Jamla artists. And then he was engineering like all the projects as well. So rappers, can I name them all? We had Rhapsody.
Mhm.
At the time when I was working, it was Rhapsody, the Tom Hardy,
The
Hollow,
Tom Hardy. Oh
right?
my! I got a folder on my old hard drive right now, guaranteed with Tom Hardy's first EP for sure.
Loved the Tom Hardy. And so it's Rhapsody, the Tom Hardy, Hollow, TP, GQ, who each played for the University of North Carolina basketball at
Hmm.
different times. TP, GQ, who else am I missing? Actual Proof.
Actual Proof. Yes, I know that name too.
Actual
Damn.
proof.
Dude, Ninth Wonder is like seriously one of my he might be in my top five favorite producers. Ninth Wonder was so integral to like my high school years and the beats I gravitated. I'll never forget seeing Little Brother oh my God, I am drawing such a blank. Can't stop, won't stop. I wonder why.
Oh, can I think of the name of that song?
I know, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
It'll come
Loving
to me
It. The
later.
song is called Loving
Loving
It.
it. I'll never forget seeing Loving It on BET for the first time and like
Mhm.
feeling like I just found a secret labyrinth of hip. I
Right.
was like, who are these guys? Why is this beat everything I've ever wanted in a in a hip hop instrumental and the rabbit hole I went to? I mean, the listening,
Yeah.
the Chitlin Circuit mixtapes. Really quick, I feel like we have gone down a hell of a rabbit hole for hip hop.
Hey,
I
that's
can
fine.
stay here, BJ, if you want, but if you need to dig us out, you just you just give me the word. Can I ask, did you go to the Little Brother block party in Durham last year?
I did not. I did
Oh
not. I have still not seen a Little Brother show. I was this close to going to their like reunion concert that
mhm.
night at Art of Cool Festival
Oh, when they first like linked up
when
together?
they right.
Wow.
But I
Oh
wasn't
my God,
able
that
to
would have been
make it.
crazy.
I didn't make the block party. I had tickets to the documentary screening. Didn't get to the documentary.
BJ.
It's
I
it's
mean, you
hard
worked
to
at Jam Lot. That's I mean, I don't feel too bad for you. You know, you guys like another one every day. That's cool.
yeah, but like I worked at Jamla when it was weird. So like the I worked at Jamla when the Wonder Years came out.
Mm,
And then Charity Starts at Home came out the same day, and J. Cole's first out, the Cole World Sideline Story, those
mm.
all came out the same day. We called it NC Hip Hop Day here.
Oh wow, yeah.
Um, but it was like I remember it being a really weird time, like because Fonte and Ninth were like just kind of starting to reconcile their relationship, and then now they're on the outs again. But like it's weird. But anyway, nah, so the best times of my life, like the what I'm doing now, I would absolutely not be doing if not for my time at Jamla. Um, and not even because I did anything great. Like, I guess I'll share this since we're here, but like my time at Jamla actually didn't go well because I said
Mm.
something stupid on Twitter at one point, not even like maliciously, but Rhapsody took offense to what I said. And
Oh
so
wow.
like there was this whole thing and they were like, you can't come back to the studio,
Oh
but
whoa.
you can keep working for us and do this and that or whatever. So for a while, I felt like I was just not
Hmm.
welcome, but we ended up patching it up. I ended up doing a pretty big social campaign for the Idea Beautiful album. So it worked out.
Damn, that's
But
cool.
um, but yeah, just that time that I spent at Jamla listening to Combat Jack show and all that, like just really ignited my love for media. And so after Jamla, I started this music marketing podcast. And during the pandemic, I ended up kind of just pivoting to comics because I
Hmm.
was falling deeper in love with comics than I was music. So there we
If I
are.
may, if I may ask a question and to also bring us back to comics, because I think this is a good springboard. Working in music on the marketing side, and then because I think it sounds like marketing is your thing, your 9 to 5 as well.
Mm,
When you and then looking at comic books in the industry, I know I see differences and shortcomings in both and things that might you could swap and that might help one another, but a lot of it I look at how music marketing works and then comic books. And also I think just learning things from like street teams and just being in hip hop and knowing how that stuff is marketed. I think I try to take some of those lessons into podcasting and how I promote things and the clips I cut, this and that. But from your perspective, I guess like what are some of the things that you see in the comic book industry that could improve on the marketing side that you see works really well in hip hop? And I know it's a long way to get to that question, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah, I think the issue is, well, comics has never like had a Jay-Z and really recognized them for who they are, right?
Hmm.
Like meaning Jay-Z is an independent artist, ends up teaming up with a major, owns all his stuff, and now everyone that comes after Jay-Z is like, yeah, cool, I'll rap, but I gotta own part of this. I gotta like, it's I gotta be able to control this or whatever. And like with comics, like I guess the biggest quote like so-called Jay-Z example, it's gotta be Todd McFarlane, it's gotta be the Image guys, right?
Yeah, I'd say probably Jim Lee as well.
Yeah, yeah. So, but like with them, for whatever reason, their success is kind of viewed as like a one-off thing. And I guess,
Hmm,
the boom of the 90s, we're not selling millions of comics anymore. And so they're just the last and best of a bygone era to many people. But I think with hip hop specifically, there is such a focus on independence, and just the focus on independence and like just agency and ownership,
hmm,
right? Like, so in hip hop, you treat it like a business. And in comics, it feels very much like hip hop would have felt in the early 90s. Like,
hmm.
I got to get signed. I got to get the deal. I got to work for the big two, whatever. Like, it's interesting to me how many comic creators don't really think about the marketing side, right? Like, even as a podcaster, I don't know how much you struggle to like really get in with like publishers and stuff like that, like, and to be viewed as like a legitimate press outlet. But it's a struggle for me. But like there are a few people who like get it. And it's like they'll reach out, they're like, hey, I put you on my email list and so on and so forth. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, so this is not that I'm the end all be all of marketing, but the idea that you're going to go and reach out to an outlet that at least has a portion of your fan base there,
Hmm.
right? And just take an active role in the development of your career and the furthering of your stories. That seems to be the minority of creators. Most are just kind of stuck at the table, like, well, I got to pound out these scripts. I got to do these pages. I don't have time to be bothered with
Yeah.
the marketing. And I guess part of that is because a lot of them don't own whatever the IP is. And so it's like, well, why do I need to waste my time
Hmm.
trying to sell this thing? It's your property. You sell it. Just pay me what my fee is.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good observation. I do find that marketing does feel lackluster, or leaves much to be desired. Um, as a whole, even though I think there are a lot of good exceptions, I think like Skybound does
Hmm.
really good marketing from the licenses they get. I think the Invincible TV show helped them out a lot, kind of like elevating them to another level. Like
Hmm.
seeing that the way they cut trailers, I think they have a really good videographer that I follow on Twitter, and I can't remember his name, but he has, like he made a trailer for the Transformers series and I believe Boyd Rivals, and they were
Hmm.
just done really well. It feels like Skybound is making an effort to like be involved and having kind of like promo and making their comics feel like a legit product that deserves that marketing like push. I know that's not safe to say for a lot of things, for a lot of other publishers, and I would say that in my situation right now, because I've been podcasting for 12 years, I think it has gotten a little easier.
Hmm.
I know that wasn't the case prior. And that is a big reason why it took me so long to get into interviews, is because it felt like it was really hard to convince anyone to come on a podcast. I mean, obviously, I think being early on in podcasting where it hadn't caught up or it hadn't become like, this kind of widely acceptable and consumed media didn't help. But I'd say now it is a lot easier. Like I think I've got a really good connection with the folks at Dynamite
Hmm.
and Image. I would say for sure Image too, and especially IDW. I think you had even tweeted about working with like Greg Katzman, who
Yep.
goes above and beyond in securing interviews and making you feel like I'm not saying he's making us feel like we're celebrities,
Hmm.
but he does put respect on what we do and create and like our value as media creators and a viable channel for to get the word out about like really dope comics.
Right. Right. Exactly. So, yeah, I think that's the difference though. Like in comics, like there's still a lot of company men. And so it's like the workload, like poor Amy at Dynamite. She does everything, it seems like.
Yeah, yeah, actually, thank you for reminding me. I was going to send her a care package, and this is the reminder I needed. BJ, really quick to interrupt, but it's also on the same kind of train of thought. I work in marketing. I'm a project manager for a huge insurance company down here, and it is. I mean, I've only been working in marketing since 2020, so a lot of it has come as like a crash course. But I'm definitely a lot, kind of feel more confident in it. And a big reason why I took this opportunity, leaving like IT and the business side of things, was because I was like, oh, there might be things I could learn from this department, from this world, that I could apply to like podcasting. And, because I was pretty set on somehow making podcasting like a full-time thing.
Mhm.
So, anyways, and what I've come to learn is like the insane intricacies and nuances and details that go into marketing and the amount of things that people put so much emphasis and importance on, some arbitrary, some BS, but there is something to be said about like analyzing like campaigns and coming up and doing like really thoughtful pushes to promote things and like having a firm understanding of like your audience and your customers and telling a story just through marketing. I think
Mhm.
sometimes that's missing in comics, where it's like which is interesting, kind of ironic, because it's like the comic books are telling this story, and they're painted, and drawn visually great, and sometimes that doesn't translate to the marketing. It's like,
Yeah.
where's that sense of storytelling and bravado there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, right? Like, because I've I've been working with musicians for
Mm-hmm.
20, 10 years at this point, right? Like, and some of the most creative people that I have met have been in the comic industry, right? Like, and I don't know why it doesn't translate, right? And I don't know if it's just because like music just has so much more visibility, right? Like with music, if you aren't seen, then you aren't legitimate,
Mm-hmm.
right? In comics, like there are like I met Ron Wilson at GalaxyCon. Had no idea Ron Wilson was a black man, right? Like it's like that's Ron Wilson.
That has happened to me on several
Yeah,
occasions where I'm like, oh, he's a brown guy. Okay, cool. That would have been nice to know. I would have definitely bought all his comics,
right, right. I'm sitting
But
there like,
that is a good point. Man, yeah, if I was to ask, I might actually do that tomorrow. I might, because I'm recording with Drew tomorrow. I might pull up a list of creators and be like, do you know what they look like? I'm not even going to ask, for skin color or background, but do you know what they look like? And I think the answer would be probably not nearly as much. You're right. That is a good point. Visibility is a shortcoming in the comic industry.
yeah. And so like with in music, so much, I mean, you can look at it as vanity, but it's like there is so much thought as to how am I going to be seen, down
Mm-hmm.
to like what outfit am I wearing, like what's my look, what's my
Yeah.
image, right? And comics are very much about the art, which in a sense
Yeah.
is pure, like it's awesome
Hmm.
because
That's a
it
good
doesn't
point.
seem like anything else is made with like that sort of approach to like just the purity of the art. Like people make music like, all right, I got to do the song for the girls, got to do the song for the club,
Mm-hmm.
got to do the song for the radio, right? And hopefully I can tell a good album story while doing all those things, right? Comics are like, you know what? I want to tell a story about a dog
Yeah.
whose family gets abducted and, it'll just be cool. And he has a cool collar that does tricks. Like,
Yeah.
all right, cool.
I guess not to say that comics has as more artistic integrity,
Hmm.
but I wonder if it's more so about the culture of creators or their
Hmm.
personalities. I think you would probably back me up here that a lot of these creators are like introverts, and the way they do communicate is through the art. So I don't know if I would put all the onus on them, even though there are exceptions to that, where I think someone like James Tinian
Yep.
is really good at marketing himself, the visibility factor. His branding is really good. Like the website looks good, just from that eye. And then obviously he does not lack in storytelling. He writes some
Right.
of the best comic books out there. So I think he's a great example of someone that like can, embrace the art, be artistically have that integrity, but also be kind of like smart about the marketing and the branding. And that's not everyone's forte. because it is such an introverted kind of a group of people.
Yeah.
But I think there's opportunities there. But I would still put maybe a majority of the onus on, maybe these companies,
Yeah.
sans any like, creator owned people that are like
Yeah.
strictly like all about themselves.
Yeah. I think the companies, maybe comic book movies are the worst thing to happen,
Hmm.
right? Like, because for one, at the biggest companies, comics are not a drop in the bucket for
Oh yeah.
profits. So it's like, what are we really going to invest into this book that we're going to sell? You know, at most, we're going to get $1 per book off of these single issues, right? Like, because the distributors got to make a dime, the retailers got to make some money, like, and we're on whatever day is receivable. Like, what's the point of this huge media push? Like, whatever, just find somebody to animate 2 pages of this comic and let's move on to the next one because we got more stuff coming out next month, right? But yeah, I think there's been such a push. Just at least, I mean, I'm new to this. I got into this 5 years ago, but everything that I see is like, how can we line up with whatever movie is out,
Hmm.
or how can we do something that's going to get optioned as a movie, right? Like with a lot of these independent properties, it's like, oh, cool, like Witches is gonna be a TV show, and Something's Killing the Children is gonna be a TV show. Like maybe this thing can be a TV show, and then you got
Hmm.
these companies that are just popping up. Like, all right, I'm gonna buy as many little indie comics as possible, and hopefully we can get some of these optioned. And so it's like the goal is not to market the comic; the goal is to exploit the comic, and
Hmm.
that's different.
On a tangent here,
Mm.
but you brought up that you've been, you just started kind of getting into comics in the last 5 years, and maybe this is too early on to ask, but I am curious: is there any, I guess, creator, title, character, genre that maybe you didn't think you would be this into, but because of the uniqueness of the comic book medium, like that made you maybe I don't know, maybe made you a fan of something that you weren't familiar with or expecting to like as much.
Yeah, I have a higher tolerance for horror in comics than anywhere else.
Yeah,
Like I
I'm
don't,
squeamish. I'm very squeamish at the movies if it's a horror
yeah,
movie.
I don't do horror movies. I specifically don't do like demon
Mhm.
stuff. Like it's just not my bag. Um, but yeah, I don't really do horrors, but I can take it in comics a lot better. I guess because it's not jump scares and stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's like there's been a lot of times where there's a story that I've read and I'm like, oh snap, I can see the underlying message in this, and that's cool. Like I'm really excited, funny enough, for Hyde Street, right? Image sent out the preview
Oh yeah.
and from Ghost Machine, and there's this kid is like killing people, but the it seems he's killing people who mistreat children in some way, and he's like he's the atonement for their sins. And it's like, huh, that's interesting. What more of this series, right? Like, so that's probably the one that like surprises me. Like there are several titles that if it came out as a TV show, I wouldn't even turn it on,
Hmm.
but in comics it's cool.
Yeah, I've recently been reading the Alan Moore Swamp Thing. And this is, that there is comic books and series and, certain creators that have had like these very iconic runs that make up the foundation and the lexicon of what we call like classic comics or the best comics of all time. And I
Mm,
think it's safe to say Swamp Thing and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing is one of those. And not to discredit the artists like Steve Bissette and oh my god, I forgot the other person's name. It'll come to me later, but it's one of those like they're comic books that and stories that are considered classic, but you're like, for some reason or the other, I just haven't got to it. And I've been reading comic books, like I just said, since like middle school, so I've
mm,
had time to read it. I've been aware of this, but it's just life. You don't get around to everything. And I remember trying to get into that early on, like a couple years ago, but the art, which is not something I was into. And as a
yeah.
horror comic book, you know what I'm saying? I just wasn't that into it. But I started reading it a week ago because a friend of mine who also runs a great comic podcast, big shout out to Chris, Oblivion Bar Podcast, sent me the first trade. And I won't lie to you, BJ. When I seen it, I was like, I don't have the heart to tell him I'm not a fan of Alan Moore Swamp Thing because the
Mhm.
art, the horror, blah 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 blah. But he was really excited for me to check it out, so I read it, and I am currently on the DC Universe app, like just consuming all these issues. So I guess I was curious to hear if you had any of these moments where you thought you didn't like something, and then later on you're like, wow, this is really my jam because of my headspace that I'm in now.
Yeah, I think Immortal Hulk is probably the biggest example of that.
Hmm.
Like, I've never been attracted to Hulk as a character,
Oh
right?
wow. Okay.
Um, but people kept saying, you got to read Immortal Hulk, you got to read Immortal Hulk. And I read it to do an appearance on somebody else's podcast, similar deal. And I read the first, I think, 12 issues, and I was like, yo, this is amazing. And read all 50 and the Gamma Flight tie-ins and all that stuff. And I was hooked. There was only the one issue that I was like, what is happening in this issue? I think it's issue 25, where he's like in space somehow. But anyway,
You know,
it was,
there's been a lot of I'm sorry, there's been a lot of similarities to that and Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, where people say
oh
like
yeah,
this is the who is the writer on that? Al Ewing. Like
Al
this is
Ewing.
Al Ewing's Swamp Thing for Hulk, because it
Mhm,
just the body horror, the metaphysical aspects, the religious undertones, like how deep
mhm.
it kind of gets.
Yeah. And so, and all of those things stood out to me, right?
Hmm.
And I saw some YouTube video. I wish I could remember who the video essayist was, but there's a video essay out there just analyzing horror as it pertains to the Hulk and
Hmm.
like what horror symbolism typically means, and like people like body horror is usually about us like confronting something ugly in ourselves or whatever. And I just randomly saw that video right before I'm reading Immortal Hulk, and I'm like, yo, like so many revelations in that series I don't want to spoil, but it was just my jam for that time period. Um, and I am totally fine if that's the only Hulk story I've ever read or ever read. But I'm into Phil Kennedy Johnson's Hulk right now. I'm enjoying that one too.
Hell yeah.
So somehow you have flipped this conversation, and you're the interviewer. Uh,
I had a couple more questions lined up, but I'm gonna
okay.
take a step. Have you got anything for me?
Um, you know what? I'm enjoying sitting in the guest chairs.
Okay.
It's a
Well,
change of
then good.
pace for me.
Let me ask you this then. I guess because you know what, BJ, and you might have received comments about this. You might even just understand this. Is that when you find a podcast you like, and there is a certain like, I don't want this to sound weird. All right. So brace yourself. There's a certain like, I don't know, like a intimacy is the only word I'm thinking of, and it's just making it sound more weird.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? Like when you find a podcast that you really like, I think you build a rapport. That's the proper word. There's a rapport
Yeah.
that you build. There's something that's been about like, just having a voice so close up to your ear. And then also like that kind of scheduled
Hmm.
routineness to it. Like every Wednesday, I know, I'm gonna check out this episode. So I guess between that, being a fan of your show, but also being a podcaster that is just naturally curious, and as you could tell by now, a freaking blabbermouth, I
Hmm.
can't help myself but to ask, come up with these questions, considering that you just started getting into comics 5 years ago. You have a really good podcast. The numbers look good. You get like really good interviews. And I'm like, damn, like it's kind of interesting to see where you're at condensed, obviously relative to my very long career
Hmm.
in podcasting, and not, just be excited for like, man, he's getting into comic books while doing a comic podcast, and he's doing really good at both. And I guess I've just got so many questions from like a new comic fan perspective.
Okay.
That's also doing, digital media with it. You have a comic shop, or your local comic shop. They
Hmm.
also sponsor you, which I think is awesome. As someone that has his local comic shop that sponsors his show, like I feel like that if you're a comic podcast out there and you don't have your LCS as a sponsor, like do some more work to get that happening. I think there
Yeah.
is such a great synergy there, and quid pro for both of you.
Right.
So some tips for any aspiring comic podcasters out there. But thinking about like your journey into comic collecting and then your relationship with this shop, like how has that been to know that you are now part of this culture, which is even though the MCU and comic book movies and TV shows are huge, they're a thing. I think to be called a nerd is no longer, you don't immediately think of comics. I
Right.
think it's safe to say when we were growing up, comic books were just straight nerdy. There was no way around it. I kept it hidden for a while. I knew when to bring it up, when not to. Now it's
Mhm.
like, yeah, people willingly ask me stupid questions about Spider-Man.
Right.
But I would say, but getting into comic books, collecting comics, having a local shop is not that big, right? Like that
Hmm.
pool compared to other hobbies is not that big. And I think there's something really unique about the routine of being a comic collector and
Yeah.
going into a shop every Wednesday and like still buying physical things
Hmm.
every week. That almost sounds archaic. You brought up
Right.
like music, being out every Tuesday. Well, now, I mean, now it's Friday, but it could be any day of the week because it's so easy to get to, right? Like
Yeah.
even if I
Yeah.
don't go to the shop on Friday, I'll just stream it Sunday night. But comic books hasn't changed in that regard. And I think there's good and bad for that. And this is my long-winded way of saying, like, how does it feel to get into this culture and, you know, and I don't know, just like embrace the weird intricacies and uniqueness of it. Like, did you feel weird walking into a comic shop? And at what point did you feel like, oh, this is my thing I do every Wednesday?
Yeah. Yeah. So I got into comics because of my daughter. I took my daughter to a free comic book day event, and it was like, okay, that there's going to be artists here,
Hmm.
so you can learn like what it's like to be a full-time artist. And I had tangentially been related to comics, right? But um, for me, comics just came at a great time.
Hmm.
Like it was at a point where, just not to get crazy deep, but like I just felt like I had an unhealthy relationship with like other media, right?
Hmm.
Like, so I'm looking for like more wholesome TV shows to watch and all this stuff. And so it was about like a 2 year slow walk into comics because um as I'm looking for like wholesome options for me, I just end up watching cartoons. And so I'm revisiting all these animated series I grew up on. So Batman and Justice League Unlimited, all that stuff. So I end up with the DC Universe app back when it had the cartoons on it.
Oh
Um,
wow, damn. That man, you just jogged my memory. That's right. The DC Universe app was legit. When it
yeah,
first launched,
when it
it was
first
like, here's a
launched,
bunch of comic books, and here's like, I think the
TV
Swamp
shows,
Thing TV
Swamp
show.
Thing TV show was on
Yeah.
there. Yeah, they had everything. Like everything DC was in that
They
app.
really they really pulled the rug on us on that.
They,
All right, let's be real.
they,
It's like, and then at some point, and I know that shit didn't I'm sorry, because it didn't last that long. I think
right.
like 2 years later at the most, they were
Hmm.
like, actually none of this is profitable. Yeah, we'll keep it just comic books, but everything else you got to go HBO for Swamp Thing and this and that. And we're still going to charge you the same price.
Right. And the worst part
Oh
being
my God.
they
Ate
took
it up.
away the Roku app. But like for
Oh,
me, the
that's
Roku
right.
app
Oh man.
was that was the deal because it was like
Mhm.
I'm watching these shows, but then I could just read a
Mhm.
comic on my TV. And so for me, like it was a great if it didn't exist, I may have never walked into a comic shop.
Hmm.
But I'm reading comics on my TV. Now I'm looking up comics on YouTube, like, oh, what's a good story to read? Blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. And so yeah, that DC Universe app kind of slow walked me in. So then I go to the comic shop, I win a copy of House of X #1. I read said copy and then I'm like, oh snap, like I need the rest of this. And they're like, oh, you want to start a box? And I'm like, what is a box?
Hmm.
And, but for me, the LCS is like the foundation of my experience with comics. Like if the
Man.
staff wasn't friendly, like shout out to Amanda, who's no longer at my LCS. But like if she wasn't the clerk, like I would literally go on different days. Like if I'd walk in and she wasn't there, it's like, oh no, I'll go back. Right. Like, but she was friendly and she was like just helpful, like, oh, you feel like this and that. And so it was like cool. And she remembered my name where other people didn't. But all that to say, um, it's the people. And what
Hmm.
made me want to do YouTube was also the people. Like, because yeah, you can go to the shop and you can talk to people, but for me, I'm getting into comics. I'm looking up comic stuff on YouTube. I'm running square into like the remnants of Comics Gate. And so there's this thing where I'm like, I don't know if I try to have these conversations in the comic shop, if I'm welcome to have them. And
Hmm.
so the internet just was helpful for me to find community. Um, but yeah, so now, I mean, I take it pretty seriously. Like it has become like such a huge part of my life. Um, but yeah, I guess it felt weird at first, like walking into the shop, but now it's been a weekly thing for the last almost 6 years, and I can't imagine not doing it weekly. Um,
Damn. That entire story, I feel like you are such a perfect poster child uh for a comic book, a new fan's like ideal journey.
mhm,
You know, I mean, think about it. You took your daughter to Free Comic Book Day. What is Free Comic Book Day? It is a what is the technical tech line? It's like the largest comic book global event. I forgot what the phrase is, but Free Comic Book Day is made to bring in new potential readers, right? Like,
right.
yes, it's to cater to existing customers and readers, but to also welcome like new potential ones. So you
Mhm,
go to the Free Comic Book Day, you win House of X, Power of X. Once again, an example of a completely new relaunch with the goal of like, hey, you don't need to know anything about the
mhm,
X-Men to jump into this. I mean, it helped, but you know, here's a brand new story with no like ties to anything back. You jump into it with that, and then you have a great experience at a local comic shop, right? Like that is the ideal thing we all think a local comic shop should be: welcoming, helpful, you know, doing the hard work of getting you to become a fan and have a box. Like you really had such an ideal journey, you
right.
know. And it was all comic books, you know. I think the other path is like, oh, I watched, and I think the more common path maybe now is, oh, I watched the MCU. I was really interested in this character. I went to my comic shop.
Mhm,
But you hit all these different kind of points: Free Comic Book Day, intrinsically comic booky event, House of X, Power of X, you know, brand new #1, and a good local comic shop, which I feel like maybe that's like the golden formula for
yeah,
you know, comic books to get new folks, or a good event, a good story, and good customer service.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And so,
BJ, we're resolving everything, all the
yeah,
problems in the
yeah.
comic book industry with this interview.
Come to us. We got the answers. But yeah, no, so even just to bring it back to like the being sponsored by my LCS, like it means the world to me.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
you
smart on
know,
you, man.
it's our second go around actually. We can talk
Hmm.
offline about the first go round. But yeah, like uh my shop is like my family, right? Like so Dan, I see that man almost as often as I see my kids, it seems, right?
Hmm.
Like he's the owner of my LCS. When you go in there, it's kind of replaced the barbershop for me. Like I cut my own hair.
Whoa, man. Yeah. Yes. I don't think I've ever thought about it from that lens. The barbershop. Yeah. Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Continue.
like,
Continue.
yeah.
You got my interest big time.
So I'll go in there, and of course you start out, you're talking about comics, right? And Dan's got like encyclopedic knowledge of all comics and all pop culture ever, right? Like it's crazy. I don't know how he has time to run his business knowing so much about TV. But anyway, um, and so you come in, you start talking about comics, you end up talking about, I don't know, your grandmother with cancer or whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? And now it's just this is the place that I'm gonna go to be with my people. And even like the stuff I'm doing now, like with YouTube and everything, like, yeah, my YouTube channel is about comics. But if you join my Discord server, yeah, we talk about comics, but like the most thing or the thing I'm most active in is like we have a fitness channel and I
Oh,
just
cool.
post my workouts. Like it's just my fitness accountability I put in there. Um, or we'll talk about like different TV shows or there's all kinds of different subjects. So it's like, but for me, it is I'm going to talk about life with people that also have an appreciation for comics, which is a big part of my life. And yeah, so the community is really important. And that's why I love YouTube because YouTube is really just social media with videos attached. And so it's cool.
You know, when I look at your journey and your success on YouTube, I will say that is one thing that if I could redo it all, and that's what I'm saying, like watching your journey in these short 5 years and
Mhm.
the success you've had, if I could redo this journey, I would have done. at some point I would have just switched to like video and really focus on like garnering a YouTube. But I think there's something that, having started podcasting so early, I've got such a strong and almost like cement relationship with audio first.
Yeah.
And, that's like where I thrive. And that's what I learned first. That's what I'm good at. So the podcast version of the short box has all the bells and whistles. That's where I go all out with the production, with the
Mhm.
sound clips. Like, I really take pride in that. And, but I know that compared to YouTube and video, there's a quicker ceiling for just strictly audio podcasting versus like going all out for video. And I remember being at a crossroads, and I was like, I'm going to stick with audio because I just don't have the time or the resources to like really learn video and to get it, like perfected. I mean, granted, don't get me wrong, I'm no slouch. I think are, transitioning to video recently and starting to put more interviews on the Shortbox YouTube channel. I try to be mindful and do a little bit of editing, not
Mhm.
nearly as much as like say the audio, but I don't know why I went on that tangent other than maybe say like, yeah, man, to watch your success in these short 5 years, it's just like you've just hit these, you've just, I don't know, man, you've just hit these certain points, like just from your journey into being a reader to, being a content creator. Yeah, you've done really well, man. You're really
Thanks,
well.
man. What's funny is like with this podcast, because we're on my podcast, not yours. No, I'm joking. But but with
I'm
this
quarterback.
show, a lot of it was like my goal was to be more intimate. You use that word intimacy.
Mm,
And for me, YouTube, which I love YouTube. It's great. Like it's great for
mm,
visibility. And I think there's the discoverability versus like the intimacy and the sort of uh the merits of the art itself, right?
yeah.
But for me, YouTube became a rat race. Like I started my YouTube channel during the pandemic, and for those early years, it was just me buying stuff and showing people what I bought. And that was cool, but it was like I'm buying all these books, I'm not reading them. Like I'm buying them because I'm interested in them, but I'm spending so much time making videos, I don't have time to ever read them.
Hmm.
And so, and people are getting hooked on like this sort of um, this adrenaline rush they're getting just watching somebody buy a bunch of stuff. And so, like, I made a conscious decision, like, you know what, I'm gonna stop doing hauls and unboxing videos. Like, I'll do them every now and then, but that's not gonna be what this channel is. And so then the question was, well, then what's the substance of the channel going to be? I'm too new to comics to be educational. Like, I can't give you the history of the X-Men. Like, I could, but I just be
Hmm.
reading Wikipedia, you
Yeah.
know? And so the podcast was a way for me to sort of do both things. Like, I can ask good questions because I have questions, right? Like I'm curious and I genuinely don't know the answers to these, right? And so for me, it's I'm learning from whoever I'm interviewing, while also doing my best to provide a platform for them to just be themselves, right? Like there are, I don't know, man. I feel like there's comic book podcasts and then there's like serious comic book podcasts. And a lot of the stuff that I was seeing before I started podcasting was like, you know, the fanboy who is like just super agreeable with everything and will just tell you, oh, I loved that page. And that was so cool. And it's like, that's cool, but I don't really get like outside of Iron Man, punching somebody, like what was the like,
Hmm.
why did they do that? Why did they make these decisions? How was it working with this artist? Was there something you wanted to do with the story that you couldn't do because you're working for a major corporation and there's editors involved? Like these are the questions that I have. And often those questions weren't being asked. And so I figured, well, not that it's me that has to do these things, but for me, my goal was if I like, go kaput, is there something that I can add to this hobby, this medium that can outlive me? Because it's not like for me, the analogy I give is like throwing a party versus like a bonfire, right? Like if I'm throwing a party, it's not a Diddy party, but if I'm throwing a party,
No
right,
diddy. Yeah.
right, no Diddy. But if I'm throwing a party, it's like the part. It's about me. When I walk in, I'm the center of attention, and
Hmm.
and whether you come to the party or not is based on my popularity or your relationship with me or whatever, right? If I'm like, you know what, we're gonna do a bonfire, let's just go. And when you get there, everyone's attention is on the fire, right? It's not about me. Like we might have it at my house, it might be in my backyard, it might be peaceful and cool, right? But it's about the warmth of the fire. And
Hmm.
so I wanted to take the focus off of me and put it back onto the comics. And so that's why I rebranded the channel. And that's where the idea for the podcast came from, because it was like I wanted to do something that I didn't have to, tailor to an algorithm. I didn't have to try to worry about like episode timing. I just wanted to have good conversations that you could listen to anytime. And so that's something that I envy about platforms like yours, where it's like you've been doing audio only or had been doing audio only for so long that to a degree the numbers don't really matter, right? Like, but go ahead.
No, and I think that's always kind of been a big hesitance about going full YouTube is that it is such a public thing, right?
Hmm.
Like your numbers are out there, your views out there, and whether they mean something to you or not, you don't know if that means something to a potential viewer or how people view you. Like there is, I mean, regardless of how how tough you think you are or how mentally fortitude, there is going to be a little bit of a scratch, whether it be my new show or large of like, self-doubt, where when you start, especially when you're starting out a channel, it's like only 5 people viewed this,
Hmm.
like what is the point of doing this? And I think YouTube, it amplifies that anxiety because it is so public. So
Hmm.
I will say there was that anxiety to overcome, but and this is kind of like a tangent here, but just a little more about myself. In 2018, I had started or I co-founded a Jack's Podcasters United group. And I will say that was such where it's essentially like I would throw these networking events, these meet and greets of other podcasters, hey, come meet us out here. If you're a podcaster, let's get together. Let's just meet. Let's talk. Let's see what you're going through, what I'm doing. And when it started, it was like just an emphasis on audio only podcasts. Obviously, now it doesn't matter if you're video or audio, you're more than welcome. But I will say my experience in working with aspiring new veteran, whatever journeyman podcasters was probably one of the better things I had did because it got me to meet other podcasters and like just be around your people, much like when you go to the shop and you're like kind of reinforces why you love this culture and this thing you do. The Jax Podcasters was huge in that, and it just made me fall in love with like podcasting, especially at a point in 2018 where I had been doing it 6-7 years, and my old co-host had left, that new co-host, and just like this state of change. There's just something about podcasting that I just could not let it go, man. And not to get too deep into it, but there is something interesting about having podcasted this long. And not only does this show serve as a means to entertain, but also inform and put the comic books on the pedestal that I see them in. Like it's
Hmm.
this real piece of art. It's also giving me like a channel to meet like friends, man. I've literally made like some of the tightest, closest friends I've ever made, thanks to the podcast and a mutual love of this art form. And and not to get too metaphysical, but it's also like a weird time capsule for me
Hmm.
because now I've started doing, as I'm like getting busy. Like currently right now, I'm planning a wedding. I'm getting married in October, so my time has been like really tight lately. So I've been dropping what I've been calling short box classic episodes
Hmm.
only on the audio RSS feed. These don't go
Hmm.
on YouTube because I just didn't have video back then. And it's
Right.
been interesting to listen back to like old episodes. And aside from maybe cringing at some stupid opinion I had or joke I made or whatever, um, it has been a cool time capsule to be like, oh, that's what I was thinking. Oh, that's what I was going through. Oh, that's where comics were at. Oh,
Hmm.
that's who the biggest artist was. So I think that keeps me going too. I think that's a big reason why I've done this so long is, like just that drive of like, let's keep going. Like let's continue documenting this art form because, it can only benefit from having more unique voices, more hardworking, crazy people that, do this thing day in, day out, sometimes with no thanks, no monetary value to it. And I do it also too for man, the people that listen. I think the
Hmm.
biggest honor of being a podcaster is knowing that you have people that listen. One thing I tell like new podcasters that are feeling down about, my podcast only got 20 view, listens. My podcast only got 30 downloads. It's like, step back for a minute, and I want you to imagine you standing in a room and 30 people sat in that room to, attentively listen to you with their
Right.
full intention. And, like that'd be crazy.
Hmm.
Like that must be what a college professor feels like, to be honest.
Right.
But yeah, man, I love the medium of podcasting, whether it be video and audio. And I think, it is, I think comic books need more of that push and that coverage.
Yeah, no, for sure. I've got to find a balance between what I love about audio and what's good about video, right? Like if somehow we could make podcasts more discoverable, like because for this specifically, if I didn't have to do video, I wouldn't at all, right? And for the most part, the videos aren't public. Um, but now I've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, well, these people are coming here for coverage. If I just hide it on the audio feed, like, was it coverage? So that's a whole different thing I'm wrestling
Well,
with.
well, you said something about, and that's what I'm saying is that I want, like I said, not a huge regret, but I wish I would have really leaned into video. I'm just at a point now I don't have the time to really make the channel I want.
Mhm.
Um, but you made a good point where comics are a visual medium. Like
Yeah.
they go hand in hand with YouTube so well. Like I don't know how many times that you've been doing one of your haul videos and like you say something, I might be cleaning the room and you say something and whatever, this creator or this title's coming out and you've got the visual, like it goes
Yeah.
hand in hand. So I think that's the power of video.
True. True. Yeah. So I got to rework some things. So a question for you, because I actually was going to ask you about Jack's Podcasters United. Um, so you talked about like just your love for podcasting. You talked about wanting to help other podcast creators. Um, what are your goals for the short box?
Phew. I feel like you're in my head right now for the last 2 years. My goals for the short box, man, I think at this point is longevity.
Mhm.
I feel like it has been one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And I can say that about a few other things, like joining the military was one of the best things I've ever done. Asking, my fiance to marry, one of the best decisions. Starting a podcast, I guess it was a decision, but it was just like one of the best things that happened to me because of all the opportunities it afforded me that I wanted to do. Like being able to go to a convention and, get in, get a media pass. I don't got to pay the ticket. I get to
Mhm.
whatever, talk to creators. It's giving me the opportunity to like host panels. I got to host so many panels at Heroes Con. I did one in New York Comic Con last year and C2E2 this year. Like so it's giving me the opportunity to travel. It's given me, obviously a ton of great friends, a amazing community, and professional contacts. And if I'm being real, it also gave me the current like corporate job I have. I put my podcast on my resume at the age of 25 because I was like, damn it, I put all my time into this, and
Right.
it's going on the resume. And I remember the person interviewing me was like, this has nothing to do with this role, but there's something about the consistency and like the drive you're showing, right? Like the fact that you've been doing it this long, there's something obviously off with you that we might be able to use at this company.
That
So
is
I don't know,
funny.
man. I guess at this point it's longevity. I feel like I have accomplished a lot. I've interviewed just about everyone I've wanted to interview. I think, I've still got like these white whale interviews like Todd
Mhm.
McFarlane, Jim Lee. I feel like Mark Wade is pretty reasonable. I think I could get Mark Wade on the show. I just got to
Mhm.
find his email. But like Alex Ross, there's obviously still some white buffalo interviews. But for the most part, man, podcasting has given me so much, and I can't ask for more. All I can do is like continue to serve, help the industry grow where I can, and continue to maybe put the show that I still want out there. And the thing is, at this point in time, I could fall back and be like, there's still plenty of shows that fill the void that I created. But there's something about having done it this long, and the pride I feel of being kind of like an elder statesman. I guess it just keeps me going.
Yeah, man. Yeah, nah, you've done the work like at a time where nobody was looking for it, right? Like, so you've it's definitely something worthy of the resume. I definitely come from somebody gave me advice a long time ago to like leave all my creative stuff off my resume. And
Hmm.
you know where it got me? Into a super boring desk job, but it's cool. But
Well, that's gonna end on more inspirational note, but I like the reality.
right.
'Cause I want to say that my job is the funnest thing at all. I mean, it's corporate America, all right. There's
Yeah.
only so much fun to be had. Um, but yeah, man, this is a labor of love that I do. And I, to also to keep it real, I've been fortunate enough to where I have made money off of this, not life changing money, but
Mhm.
enough to justify keep going between like the patrons who believe in the show and support it that way and help me keep the lights on that way, and then the sponsors and working with Ben at Gotham City Limit, and just what I'm saying, like it
Yeah.
it helps that way too, that there's a monetary, whether no matter how small it is, that is also kind of motivating too. And that's something I say too, is like, if you like a show, support a show. Like
Mhm.
if you like a show and you like the creators, and they feel and they give you that joy, especially if you're someone that tunes in every week. Like if it's in you to support and be a patron of something, then I suggest it, man. Because I mean, how much work goes into it, and I don't think that is quite understood by the general populace,
Right.
because there's so many options, right? Where it's like, well, and not on that, but I get it too. Life is hard. The struggle is real. In this economy, it's wild. But I don't know. I guess just look out for the people that create the content that you like. Like that little bit of that dollar or two a month means a lot to them.
It does. It does for sure. Like I think for me, my only goal starting out was, can I pay for my comics with this? Right. I think
Yep.
that's it.
Same. I was working at the shop. I could have stopped there. I was like, I mean, I'm technically kind of getting free comic books.
Right.
Like there we go.
Right. So that's a part I left out of the story. We were pregnant when I started my channel. And
Oh
the
wow.
whole, like, one of the things was because I already had a YouTube channel about music marketing that
Mhm.
was like pretty successful. But I was like, okay, well, can I get a channel about comics monetized before this baby is born? That way I don't have to spend all of my money on diapers. And it worked out because it just did.
I love hearing that, because I feel like comic fans, we're some of the most frugal, but also the stuff we spend money on. Like, if you really think about it, you're like, I spent how much money on comic books, on
Yeah.
these, picture books. So it's funny to hear that your initial goal was like, can I at least get my comic books paid for? And I feel like I've worked my ass off to be able to say yes. And I sometimes get review copies, which is a
Mhm.
blessing. Which, by the way, you said something really funny on that Ben on Mean episode, that
Uh-huh.
I was like, only BJ, a fellow podcaster, would say that and understand the feeling I get too. People are like, B, you get free comic books, like, sent to you. Like, what is there to complain about? But you said something about sometimes these review copies have these giant watermarks where you're almost like,
Yeah.
I will pay double the cover
Right.
price to get this watermark off. So it's not everything that is cracked up to be. And when you said that, I thought about a few books, which I won't name, from certain publishers that I get, that I'm like, I know this will be good. I'm just gonna buy it. I'm just gonna buy it because the review copy is whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I will stop reading a story. Like, all right, the first 5 pages were good. Cool. I'll see the rest of them at the shop.
Yeah.
Like,
Question for you. Out of all the interviews that you've done, I guess what's been the biggest, biggest lesson, or something that really resonated with you, that a guest shared, whether it be a story, advice, or personal thing or whatnot? Like, do you have a memory that comes to mind that really made you like, wow, that was a awesome, thing they said?
I go back to my priest interview a lot.
Hmm.
Um, because one, it was an interview I didn't expect I'd get. Right. Like, well, first off, let's shout out Dynamite because I don't know if my podcast would exist the way it does without Dynamite. Um, they just reached out of the blue and were like, "Hey, could you interview such and such?" And that just turned into, recurring guests and stuff. But Priest was one where it almost didn't happen because, again, I've got my convictions. I'm a youth minister. So, like, pushing a Vampirella issue is just something that's not doesn't work for me,
I know
you
exactly what
know?
you're talking about. I didn't have the same hesitations.
Uh-huh.
I think mine more so came from I was like when I had him on the podcast, I was like, I have never once spoken about Vampirella.
Hmm.
I also know it is a very horny book or, a horny character. I mean, she's kind of embedded in the sex sells type attitude. So I had the same kind of hesitation, but I could not pass up interviewing Christopher Priest.
Exactly.
Like for me, it was the weight of the name. I was like, I don't care if I got to talk about Vampirella. Like,
Right.
I'm gonna make this my interview.
Right. And that's exactly what I did. We ended up talking for like 3 hours. And so I ended up releasing it in three parts. And I don't know that there's anything that he said that I'm like, man, that was great advice. But it was just sort of the combination of like just how he viewed himself,
Mm,
right? Like when he's talking about how he never realized he was the first black anything. Or
yeah.
how he even now, like he's like, Sue, I'm so mad because my favorite interview with Priest was my interview with Priest until I listened to your interview with Priest. I
Oh,
felt
damn, that means
like
a lot.
I felt like you got all of the great things and somehow managed to do it within a timely manner. Like I had to pull all that out in 3 hours. But anyway, um, but what he said to you that Superman lost is like his biggest achievement because he felt like he was a comic writer again and not just a black comic
Mm,
writer, right? Like for all of the because that's become a big part of my show is shining a light on black creators who may not otherwise get it, right? And so for that to be something that's so important to me and for him to have a completely different perspective on it as the first black guy to do a lot of these things, it was like it just makes you think differently about how you approach um everything. Like, but so I think that was a big lesson, like just not
hmm.
assuming anything about anyone. Um and just sort of I don't know, there's a lot that I learned from Dennis Cowan popped up on my YouTube channel, not on the podcast yet, but he just like, popped up in a live stream one time. And him telling the story of like Milestone and just so much of it just being about going for it. Like I am going to go for it. There, like just about every interview I do is an
Hmm.
origin story interview, and that there's always that I'm gonna go for it point. Like even today, I just put together a press page on my website, like to pitch to publishers and brands and stuff, because it's like for this next however many months until this new baby gets here, I want to go for it. Like I want to just put myself out there. Like you can say no to whatever I'm proposing, but for me, it's just the exercise of going for it.
Well said.
And
Well said.
so, but yeah, so that's the big lesson that I get from just about everyone that steps in the chair.
No, that is that was an amazing answer. And you brought up Dennis Cohen and Milestone,
Mhm.
and I actually had this note here because I'm like, I wonder if BJ would appreciate this. I think about I think about like what are my whole, my grails in
Mhm.
comic books. And I've always prided myself in a weird way. I don't know if it's like something to be prideful about that I have never been that big into the I don't know, phrase it, like the selling side of comic books, the
Yeah,
market, the I guess that side. I don't know what
the
exactly I would phrase it.
speculator.
Yeah, the speculator side, the collector side.
Hmm.
Um, Oddly enough, it's something that I have kind of grown interested in.
Hmm.
And I can get into that later, but I've always prided myself in the sense of like, for me, it's story first. I don't really care about the monetary value. To be honest, I might have a bunch of rare comics, but I just don't have the energy or time to sell it or stay up to date like that. I feel like it's gotten so crazy. It's almost like stock markets now.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's been an interesting thing to watch grow as well is like that side of comic books become really big and it makes sense because that's honestly literally where all the money is in comic books, right? Like the
Yeah.
resellability and that market. So I get it. But I've always prided myself in being much like my dad. It's about the story, the creators. I like learning about continuity and these like interesting things. So I feel like my grail list isn't your typical like ASM1, which I mean, look, it's I feel like that's such an easy answer. Like, yes, we would all love ASM1 or Action
Right.
and Comics 1. That is like a gimme. But my holy grails are always like, I feel like maybe more like literal grails.
Hmm.
And you brought up Milestone, and I'm getting to a point here. I promise. I know I've been long-winded today, but I'm assuming you watched the Milestone doc that came out on was it HBO that had Method Man narrating it.
Yep.
Okay, they brought up in that documentary how Milestone they built a Bible where it was
Hmm.
like before we go to any publisher, we need to make sure we know what we're creating, who these people are. Like, let's build this world. And the way they talked about that Milestone Bible, that is one of my holy grails
I
of
want
comic
one
books.
so bad.
And it, sometimes I'm like, does it really exist? Because I can't find nothing on. I've been on eBay. I think I've set up Google searches, but it's one of those things where there was probably only enough for the creators, right? Your Dennis
Hmm.
Cohen's, Ryan McDuffie's, and all that. So that to me is a real grail. Like that is
Yeah.
an ultimate grail because that is like literally the thing that created this universe.
Yeah.
I guess you could say the same thing for like Action Comics 1, but something about the Milestone Bible. And to your point, like that story of the creators going for it and being like, I think the theme of this interview has been like, creating the thing you want out there in the world.
Hmm.
That's a prime example of
Yeah.
like, hey, there isn't any great representation of Black superheroes or Black culture. Let's go ahead and create it. Yeah, I mean, come on, man.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there, everyone I've talked to that has a milestone Bible or has had one cherishes it like it is
Damn.
the holy
Oh
grail
my
that it
God, that's
is.
so cool.
Right. Like Illich still has his. I think maybe the only one who may not have one is Dennis, ironically.
Wow.
But but yeah, no, they all are like, no, this is my baby. I guard this thing with my
Oh my
life.
God, that is so cool here. I'm not, it's like, yeah, I'll probably never own one in my life, but that is so cool to hear, man, that still means something to them. I mean, how could it not? How could it not? That is, and maybe to go back to the question, like, what's my goal of podcasting? I think I just got to double down on longevity because to me, it is the perfect example of me going for it and it working out.
Yeah.
Like well, I'm not saying like I'm some big A-lister or a celebrity, but in my head, like this has just given so much back, and I feel like I owe it to the soul of this show and the people that listen to just keep going. And I feel like I'm waiting for comics to suck. To like really suck to
Right.
where I could be like, hey guys, look, it really sucks. I can't dedicate the time. But it just feels like every year I find myself saying, man, this is a really great year to be in comics. It might be the best year in comics, I've gotten to experience. It
Yeah.
feels like every year it's just been maybe the quality has waned on certain titles and
Hmm.
certain creators might hit or miss, but you can't say that the comic book industry isn't interesting. It's just an
Right.
interesting thing, man. I can't I sometimes I try to describe it to my fiance about like like because she comes from a marketing background and she's in
Hmm.
logistics. So sometimes when she hears about like, wait, they sell comics like what? Like, wait, you got to go into the shop every Wednesday?
Right.
It's so weird to outsiders that don't get it. But when you're in it, man, it is so fun and just interesting.
Yeah, for sure. No, yeah, explaining solicits to someone like that's just like, what?
I
Yeah.
read my I read my I tend to read my comics at nighttime. I
Uh,
need like I've now become addicted to my iPad at nighttime, and that's when I read comics. That's my way of unwinding after sending 100 emails a day and editing and just being in front of a computer is being in front of a smaller computer. But I'm reading comics,
yeah.
and every now and then I'll be reading the previews, and I'm like, what are you reading? Oh, like, this is previews. This is what's coming out in the next 3 months.
Right. It
And
is
if I
the
want,
most.
and if I want any of this, I have to fill out this form and let my shop guy know to order it for me and hope that Diamond doesn't screw him over. Man, God, comic books sometimes talking about it out loud, you're like, why do I do this to myself? But the
Right.
stories are so damn good.
Right. They're amazing. I think to follow up on what you said, I think 2024 is the best year that I've seen in comics. I mean, I've only been in here 5 years, but this is the best of the 5 years. like across all publishers. Dynamite's killing things with Disney and Warner Brothers licenses. We got the Dawn of DC was really good until they interrupted it with Night Terrors. But now we've got the All In initiative to look
Mhm.
forward to. The Ultimate stuff at Marvel, really,
Oh,
really good. Like,
yeah. I am a believer that Hickman can really do. I'm kind of at this point, like Marvel, give him the keys to everything. I mean, they
right.
kind of gave him the keys with this whole Ultimate Universe, but I to go. You brought up something about the Christopher Priest interview that I
Mhm.
think applies to Hickman, where and even like Felice, is it Felice Camp or Dennis Camp, the
Dennis Camp.
writer of Dennis Camp, the writer of Ultimates, is that I want more, and I think this extends to Ram V as well. I want more thoughtful people in comics. Like
Hmm.
Christopher Priest, I think he said a lot of similar things too on my interview, where I appreciated that he was approaching this with integrity. And he said something about like, the readers aren't dumb. I don't have to spoon feed them everything. And, yeah, it's like, yeah, give me a little bit of a challenge. Like, let me think. I don't need every answer like ham fisted. And there's just something about the writers I just named, like the way they write just feels believable. It
Hmm.
doesn't feel like they're trying to pander or insult my intelligence. Like it's just thoughtful storytelling, and there's just so many great examples. And it's cool to watch some of these, non-big two publishers be on par quality wise. They might not have the same size or
Hmm.
the same brand power and all of that, but quality wise, Boom Studios is killing it. Skybound on par. And you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Quality wise, I think when you look at it like that, and for me, and I think safe to say for you and your audience, that's what matters. And right
Yeah.
now, you're hard pressed to find, a really terrible comic book. I feel like you have to do, you know, I don't know. It's to your point. It has been a great year for comic books, and to see the rise of like the indie publishers and creator-owned stuff, I think we're seeing like a resurgence and just maybe not. I don't know, just like a re-energized, creative market.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if it's just spirits are up after COVID's finally like over or
Mm.
not over or whatever it is. I don't know what, but it's like there's just been a new creative energy for the last
Yeah,
year, 18 months, and I'm loving it, right? Like, and it's, I've never watched publishers. I was always a character guy, but now I'm like, oh, Mad Cave's got a new series. What's it about?
yeah,
I don't care. I'll grab it, right? Like, like it's so, it's really cool. It's really cool
agreed.
where comics are right now. Look, man, so this is one of those conversations that could go for 3 hours just because I feel like we're kindred spirits, got a lot
Oh
in
yeah.
common, and it's just fun. But you got a lovely fiance to get to. I got to take kids to school in the morning. Congratulations, by
Thank
the
you.
way.
Same to you. Congratulations on the second child.
Third.
Okay, it's third child. Yeah, third time's a charm. Congratulations. That is awesome.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Yeah, man. I'm excited.
And yes, this could easily. I mean, I've got like I've got so many hip hop questions in the back pocket
Oh,
as well as comic book questions. But I think what we could do
mhm.
is I'm gonna have you on the short box,
Okay.
and we can have we'll be able to have another 2 hours of completely new content. But yeah, I'll get you on the short box and continue this. But this was a lot of fun, BJ. Like, yeah, I think I feel the kindred energy, man. That's what I'm saying. I was like, I like this guy, and I knew
Right.
it. I knew why.
Man, I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you taking the time. Um, and yeah, we'll definitely I'll come on to your show and try to make it my show. We'll do it.
Yeah, that's the only right thing to do. You got to return the favor. Thank
Right.
you, man. It's been a pleasure.
Same to you. So before we go, people that want to follow the
Oh,
short box and
God,
follow
go.
you, where can they do that?
Man, I forgot I was on here to promote a podcast. I'm over here asking the questions and all right, all right. So I think it's safe to say, if you are listening to this right now, whether you know it or not, you enjoy comic book podcasting a lot. And I think it's safe to say you would enjoy my show because you have tolerated me for close to 2 hours. And I know I've been long winded at times, I've been interruptive at times, but I'm just excited. And this is where I come to life. So if you enjoyed this 2 hour conversation with Brandon, I want you to go ahead and check out the Shortbox podcast wherever you get your podcast. Now, I did mention that there is a YouTube channel. You'll find all the interviews. You won't find all the episodes. So you might want to go ahead and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other podcast app. But I do post on YouTube, right? So there is that. But you can find everything you need to know about the Shortbox podcast at theshortboxpodcast.com.
Nice and succinct. I'm not going to edit in any special effects and like little doobie doobie doop for ad breaks and stuff. So
I respect it.
Don't go over there and get spoiled. But definitely check out the Shortbox podcast. I'll leave links to all of that in the show notes and the description of this video episode on YouTube. And yeah, go listen to the Shortbox podcast and then read something dope today. Peace.